Oh, good.
Yeah.
Well, good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Everybody looks excited today, and the non-snow day, so thank you all for showing up when it's not snowing.
Coming.
I know.
Coming.
It is coming. So the text
It's not gonna snow.
is not going to snow?
No.
I'm going to hold you to that, Gary.
It's just gonna be in the air a little.
You say that and it will snow.
I mentioned this morning, that maybe we should have a Halloween snow day.
Ah, yes. Yes.
No, we shouldn't.
So this Sunday is actually Reformation Sunday, and so I was wondering, why would they pick this text for today, for Reformation Sunday? Because people are already telling me this is a hard text to preach on.
Kings 1.
Yeah. What do you guys think? Why would they include this text today for...
The church was
Yes, the church is divided for Reformation Sunday. Or for Reformation
Rebels.
Sunday.
Rebels.
Rebels.
This is
The rebels.
Israel rebels. So that's what Reformation is about. We kind of did that with the Catholic Church.
Yes.
Rebels.
We did have some disagreements with the Catholic Church.
And the Reformation banner is in the,
It's coming.
in the social hall.
Yeah.
Joan and I made that years ago.
Yeah. So I think it's important to before we jump into the text, I think because it really does a good job reflecting of what the Reformation, the sort of the themes of Reformation. Let's talk about what happened on the Reformation. I think so often we just assume we all know what's going on for the Reformation. So let's just jump back for a second into time and talk about the one and only time the church was reformed. You know I'm lying when I say that. So yeah, so the church has always had some type of reformation going around. This is not something new. For us as Protestants or protesters or rebels, if you want to use Star Wars type language, this is something sort of newer to us. This is in the 1500s, but the church has always had a sense of reformation. The church is always sort of reforming itself because the church always gets lost. They always get bogged down in the details. So the time that we celebrate is Martin Luther asking the Catholic Church, and the Catholic Church, what does Catholic mean? We say this every week because I got some people that universal. Some people get really mad when we say this during the Apostles' Creed. We say the Holy Catholic Church. They're like, we don't believe in the Catholic Church. I'm like, great. We believe in the Universal Church, which is what Catholic means. And so they were the only gig in town. Janine, you can sit next to me. For me it will be.
And she's declining your
Oh,
offer.
she's
Look
declining.
at this.
She's declining.
In the Congregational Church, in their wording, they say the Church Universal,
Correct.
I think.
So yeah. Yeah, so that's basically what that means. So you have at this particular point in time, when the church, so when Luther was alive, and this is sort of the time that we see the Reformation, this is the time that we say that there has been some reforming within the church. Again, it's been happening for all time, but we, as Lutherans, since we follow Luther, because he's always right, you can't see that I'm rolling my eyes, but yes, but this is, as Lutherans, we take the mark because there was a huge amount of Reformation happening at this particular point in time. It really was Luther inviting the church to say, hey, I don't agree with some of the stuff we're having. And Luther's intention was never to have a Protestant denomination. Luther wanted the Catholic Church to fix itself. Luther was hoping that the Catholic leaders would hear his words and say, hey, you're right. We need to take a step back. We need to look at more biblically what's happening. We got to think more Christ-centered. That's what you would think, as a monk within that time period, that you would think that the Catholic Church would want to take the holdings of the teachings of Jesus. They would want to be the force for good in the world, to be God's hands and feet in the world. That's what Luther assumed. And That was a wrong assumption. Especially when people get into power. People don't want to relinquish power. People don't like to be called on the carpet when they have power. And so it should be no surprise that the Catholic Church came down on Luther and said, what are you talking about? We're doing everything fine. You know, we're not going to have you change the power structure right now because this has been working great for us. No matter, it hasn't been working great for the millions of other people in the world. And so Luther, that's what Luther got Luther's cackles going. And so Luther was a very quiet man. No, he wasn't. He was very boisterous. And so he took it as a personal challenge. So if you're not going to follow what God wants me to do, I'm going to show you and tell you and beat you into submission with all my words to tell you what you need to do. And so that's sort of how the Reformation got going. Was Luther really, and the only reason that it took off was because of where Luther was at. Where was Luther? What country was Luther in? Germany. So the German princes at the time didn't like the central sort of power that the Pope had, and so they, if you want to use your Star Wars analogy, they were sort of the rebels against the empire of the Roman, the Roman Catholic Church at the time. The Germans said, no, we're not going to put up with this. There's some other, so you might be thinking, man, these guys are way above their time. Look how noble they are. They're trying to protect the faith. Oh no, they didn't want to keep their lands. And the way they could do that was say, we have a religious disagreement with you. And Luther was their all-star quarterback when it came to that. I'm throwing around a lot of analogies today.
You learned all this from Gary Simpson, didn't you? Right? A lot of it.
A lot of it, yeah.
I mean, he's a tremendous teacher.
Yeah.
Tremendous.
So you have Luther, and Luther is like a prolific writer. And Luther is a cult of personality in some sense. I mean, he didn't care what other people thought. He would push forward. And so this is sort of how the Reformation got going. And Luther's whole goal in this was to reform the church, to get the church to start doing what the Bible is telling the church to do, what, good practices is. That when God is talking about grace, what does that look like? And how do we get more people interested in God? So at this particular point in time, when you look at the worship services going on in the Catholic Church at this time, what language was the service in? Latin. How many of you speak Latin today? Not very many. Try to. Yeah, there you go. So, and so you have these, and so the other thing too is half the priests that were up there didn't know what they were talking about. Most people couldn't read, so you have these things in front of you, these Bibles in front of you. Louise has an electronic one in front of her. Most people did not have a Bible with them at that time. Most people, I told you what the Holy Word would say. I could make any of this up because half the time the priests couldn't read, so they were making stuff up. And so they're trying to tell, so so this is the setting that Luther comes in. And Luther says enough is enough. We need to follow God's word. We need to, do what is right for people and to get people to understand their spirituality and stuff like that. And so this is the Reformation that takes off for us. This is what we celebrate as Luther nailing those 95 theses on the door at Wittenberg. And all those were talking points. Let's talk about these things. Again, he wasn't trying to create a different church. He really wanted the Catholic Church to survive and to thrive and to just do the right thing. But as
I don't remember, did he get ousted?
Oh, Luther? Oh yeah. Oh yeah, they took
Just
him
right after that?
Oh, not right after that. He got called on the carpet from one of his bishops.
There was a diet of worms.
Yeah.
He was brought before
Yeah.
the Holy Roman Empire
Yeah.
and emperor and church officials.
Yeah.
And told he had to recant everything he had said.
Right.
And
Burn
he
your
thought-
books.
He thought about it overnight.
Yeah.
He came back the next day and said,
Nope.
can't do it. You prove that the scripture is wrong and then I'll recant.
Yeah.
But you couldn't prove the scripture was wrong. He was quoting scripture
Right.
for why he was doing what he was doing and what it said.
Yeah. So, and that's, yeah, and so they were going to have him killed. he was rescued by the some of the German princesses' men, and he was taken into hiding, and he was in hiding for such a long time. And so that's Reformation Sunday as a reminder for us. It could be a celebration of how we Lutherans were right for once.
If he was in hiding, who carried on his,
Oh, he did. He still did it.
out of hiding?
Out of hiding. So, because he was stuck in one of the castles.
And while he was stuck in the castle, he translated the Bible into German,
Yep.
so that the people would be able to read the Bible if they were literate,
Right.
which is not very likely. Philip Melanchthon didn't get put in prison, so he could also be an advocate for Luther,
Correct.
right?
And give Kate some,
Yeah.
Yeah.
yeah. If he hadn't had her as a wife, he wouldn't have done all that either.
No, she was
Exactly.
a remarkable woman.
Exactly. So, and she was a nun,
Yeah.
and so he took her out of the nunnery. He was just going to have these particular nuns married off to a bunch of his friends. He fell in love with Katie, and there
he
you go.
smuggled her out of the place
Yep.
in beer barrels or wine barrels.
So one of the two. Yeah. So
Empty.
right.
And she's squished in there and going, what am I doing?
Yeah, exactly. Well, they all were thinking that. What are we doing in this? Shouldn't we just follow what's going on and stuff like that? And it's a reminder. I think Reformation is a reminder of how do we always look at where we're at right now and say, are we going on the right path? Are we moving down the right path? Are we, don't take everything for granted. Look at it. Look at what you're doing, and is it meaningful? Are we doing what we really need to do, or are we not? And that's an argument you could still make for today's church as well too. And so I think that's.
What do the Catholics teach about Reformation?
Well, after the Reformation, there was a counter-Reformation.
Correct.
So after Luther literally succeeded, the Catholic Church did finally come to their senses and think, okay, how are we going to bring people back,
Right.
that aren't, estranged from us? They had the Counter-Reformation.
Yeah. And the Catholic Church has, they said that Luther's had some good points. They don't agree with his methods, but they said he had some good points. And they unfortunately, still do some of the same things, though.
Yes.
They still have indulgences. And that was, so indulgences, if you didn't know, so we talk about indulgences a lot. So just in case you don't know what that was, so at that particular point in time, the Catholic Church was raising money for a new building project. And
St. Peter's in Rome.
yeah, and so they didn't have enough money. Well, to get more money, what they said was if you have a relative or you yourself or a friend and you don't know if they're in purgatory or wherever they're at, you give us some money, they go to heaven. No questions asked.
Oh my gosh.
30-day money-back guarantee, that type of stuff. So this is what Luther's like, no, there's nothing in the Bible that says about that, So.
Somebody made it up, huh?
Yeah, they made it up because they needed the money. That's just hey, we could get this extra money out of people. This is what we do. You can get them out of purgatory by just giving us $15.
Well, where in the Bible does it say there's purgatory?
That's a great argument. I don't know. So
Because even Jesus said to the thief on the cross.
you'll be with me today in paradise.
Yeah. He didn't say, well, you'll just spend some time in
There'll be a
purgatory.
timeout.
It's a timeout room.
Good time out, right?
You have to remember
So,
that's
yeah. And then the other difference too with us in the Catholic Church is we don't believe you don't need me as your pastor, as your intermediate between you and Jesus. You can just talk to Jesus today.
Which is why they venerate Mary,
Correct.
probably more than we do, because Mary is a means to get
To talk to Jesus. Yeah.
Jesus.
Yeah. And so your best person to talk to if you're a Catholic and you want to get a hold of Jesus right away, you need to talk to the Pope because the Pope has a direct line to Jesus.
The 1-800 number?
I don't know. I don't know if he's got Jesus' cell phone number or his email or text message.
Speed dial.
So speed dial.
There are some who now consider Mary a co-redeemer.
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah.
That's
A co-redeemer.
Right. So
Not a cold redeemer, but a
co-redeemer.
co-redeemer.
But on the other hand, there are Catholics that are very devout, that
Oh, yeah.
don't buy all of,
Correct.
I mean, I know people that are very, probably evangelical Catholic, whatever, so, and a lot of it I always hear depends on the priest.
Well, that's the thing too. Yeah, you have to, when you look at, so the Catholic Church is huge compared to us. We are a small denomination. We are not very big. We're not even the biggest Lutheran denomination in the world.
Who is?
It's not Tanzania. I think it's Ethiopia. Lutheran Church in Ethiopia, I think, is larger. They have 7.9 members. 7.9 million members. And I think the church in Tanzania is next. I think we're like the 6th biggest Lutheran denomination because you have the church in Sweden, Norway, Germany. I think those are the other ones that are bigger than us. I'd have to look again. But so we're a very small denomination. But Lutheranism itself is actually fairly big. But the Catholic Church is really huge. And so what Randy's saying is it makes perfect sense because, they have, if you just go to the diocese in the Twin City areas, you can see the difference between, and you can say the same thing about Lutheran churches as well, too. It depends really on your pastor. But, if you go to Guardian Angels Catholic Church, which is a very liberal church, you can see the difference between that and, if you go down to, I'm trying to think of the church in Cottage Grove. I can't think of it. But but you have those two churches that aren't that far apart, and Guardian Angels is a very liberal denomination because the pastors and priests that the priests that are there versus the priests that are at the Cottage Grove Church. But that's sort of how their polity sort of works. And the other thing with them, with their particular churches too, the bishops just tell people this is where you're going to go. This is your church. This is what church you're going to be serving. You don't have a choice in the matter. Where on the Lutheran Church on the other side, theoretically we have a choice, but not always the case.
We have a friend that just moved to from one home to another, and the best part of it was that it was a Catholic home. I mean, I have to laugh, that's what they think it's always because it had the statue of Mary out
There you go.
The statue of St. Francis out in the garden. And the best part was that it was Catholic. And they were very, very Catholic.
So that gives you a little background for Reformation. I just want to give you that little bit of a background because I think a lot of times we're just tied to that particular event and we think, okay, this is what Reformation means, but Reformation is more than that. This is an event that we remember as Lutherans and as Protestants, but it's an event that should be always ongoing, and we know that because of the text that we're going to read today. So as we look at today, we've gone a little farther. So King David's dead at this particular point in time, and his son Solomon took over. And what was the one gift that Solomon wanted from God? Wisdom. Why didn't he use it? He asked God for this wisdom. He makes one good reading where he uses the wisdom, and then after that he just sort of sticks it in his back pocket and doesn't use it again.
Didn't seem to pass it on.
He didn't pass it on at all. So you have King Solomon. Arguably, again, one of the most powerful kings in Israel. He had a ton of wives and concubines. He made the state of Israel very rich. He had a wonderful palace. But something interesting happened during his reign as well, too. So in the book of Exodus, the people of Israel were what to the Egyptians? Slaves. Under King Solomon, the people of Israel were slaves to their own king. They didn't get very far, did they?
No.
They went from being slaves to a foreign ruler to being slaves to their own ruler.
But they wanted a king.
There you go. They have to take responsibility for their actions on that. Yeah, they wanted a king. God said, you don't want a king. Oh, yes, we do. And, well, we get to happening with King Solomon. Yes, he was a great king in some people's eyes, but he also caused a lot of pain. He was not a really good king when the people of Israel concerned, if they had to work like slaves in order to fulfill what he wanted to do. Not what God wanted to do, but what he wanted to do. So we're at a point right now where King Solomon has died, and I believe it's his two sons that we read about today, R and J. You can just say R or J if you want. We did yesterday at tech study, that's why I'm saying that today. And so right now you're sort of, the people of Israel are like, okay, so they're going to have a new king. And so traditionally, King David's line came from Judah. And then it was also the Benjamites too, or the other clan that King David was really happy to work with. So there's two of the 12 tribes that held particular sway with King David, and were his sort of like his boys and girls, and his nation, his people. And so now we're going to have this story today, and it is a little crude and rude, but that does happen in the Bible from time to time. And I bet you all know the part too. All right, so who would like to read 1 through 5? 1 Kings chapter 12, verses 1 through 5.
Then Rehoboam went to Shechem, for all Israel had come to Shechem to make him king. Now it came about when Jeroboam the son of Nebat heard of it, he was living in Egypt, for he was yet in Egypt, where he had fled from the presence of King Solomon. Then they sent and called him, and Jeroboam and all the assembly of Israel came and spoke to Rehoboam, saying, Your father made our yoke hard. Now therefore lighten the hard service of your father and his heavy yoke which he put on us, and we will serve you. Then he said to them, Depart for 3 days, then return to me. So the people departed.
6 through 10.
Then King Rehoboam consulted the elders who had served his father Solomon during his lifetime. How would you advise me to answer these people, he asked. They replied, If today you will be a servant to these people and serve them and give them a favorable answer, they will always be your servants. But Rehoboam rejected the advice of the elders that they gave him and consulted the young men who had grown up with him and were serving him. He asked them, What is your advice? How should we answer these people who say to me, Lighten the yoke your father has put on us? The young men who had grown up with him replied, Tell these people who have said to you, Your father put a heavy yoke on us, but your yoke lighter. Tell them, My little finger is thicker than my father's waist. My father laid on you a heavy yoke. I will make it even heavier. My father scourged you with whips. I will scourge you with scorpions.
Then 11 through 17. That's okay.
I read an extra verse.
That's all right. Just the end
3
of.
days later, Jeroboam and all the people returned to Rehoboam, as the king had said, Come back to me in 3 days. The king answered the people harshly, rejecting the advice given him by the elders. He followed the advice of the young men and said, My father made your yoke heavy. I will make it even heavier. My father scourged you with whips. I will scourge you with scorpions. So the king did not listen to the people, for this turn of events was from the Lord, to fulfill the word of the Lord had spoken to Jeroboam, son of Nebat, through Ahijah and the Shilonite or something.
That works for me.
When all Israel saw that the king refused to listen to them, they answered the king, What share do we have in David? What part is Jesse's son? To your tents, Israel. Look after your own house, David. So the Israelites went home. But for the Israelites who were living in the towns of Judah, Rehoboam still ruled over them.
And then who would like to read 25 to 29?
What do you mean?
No,
It was 25.
25.
Sorry, we
Then
skipped.
Jeroboam fortified Shechem in the hill country of Ephraim. And what did you say, 25 to?
20 through 29. Yep.
Okay. From there he went out and built up Peniel. Jeroboam thought to himself, the kingdom will now likely revert to the house of David. If these people go up to offer sacrifices at the temple of the Lord in Jerusalem, they will again give their allegiance to their Lord, Rehoboam, king of Judah. They will kill me and return to King Rehoboam. After seeking advice, the king made 2 golden calves. He said to the people, "It is too much for you to go up to Jerusalem. Here are your gods, O Israel, who brought you out of Egypt. One he set up in Bethel and the other in Dan."
That's good. That's good. Now, why can't it needs to be like Dan? Okay, so what do you think of the text? What questions do you have?
They're kind of harsh with their words.
They are very harsh with their words. They're very harsh with their words.
And these are brothers.
Get the
These are brothers.
scorpions to
Yep.
go after you.
Yeah. Yeah.
Scourge means to whip them.
Yeah.
So this is how you treat family?
Yeah. So,
Some families you do, though.
so yeah, that's what. So when the king said that stuff, I mean, what sort of arrogance he has, Please be merciful on us. Oh no, we're not going to be merciful on you. We're going to make it worse for you.
I wonder why he,
Sided with the
discouraged was
Instead of
discouraging the nice guys and went with the young bad guys. So.
Well, it's your friends.
Power.
How many times do you listen to your parents?
He needs new friends.
Well, there's that, too.
He turned to yes men.
Yeah, he
Yeah,
turned
they
to.
were all his
Yeah.
young followers, so
Sounds like the,
he wanted to
He
hear a
wanted more
certain answer
power.
and he knew they would submit.
You want to keep the power.
You want to keep the power, yeah. That's the thing. Once you have power, it's hard to relinquish power. So this is what God knew when God said, "Do you really want a king?" People of Israel are like, "Oh yeah, we want a king. It's gonna be great." Until it's not.
what a mess. Yeah.
What a mess. And it might have been fine with well, I would say none of their kings were great to the people, but what do I know? So, but yeah, so you have this king who's basically like, okay, so you guys are going to work harder for me, and then so the interesting thing comes a little later on. We have to your tents, O Israel. Basically, the people are saying, we ain't going to put up with this. You go do what you're going to do. We're going to do what we're going to do. You govern your own people. We don't want any part of you. So this is where you're having division within the kingdom right here. This is the situation where he could have brought the people of Israel together into one fortified kingdom that would have stayed that way for a lot longer time. And he chooses in his arrogance to say, no, you will do exactly what I say and not any less. And this is when the church or when the nation breaks apart. To your tents, O Israel, we're not going to listen to this blowhard. And then we see that his brother does no better. He sets up 2 different calves so that they don't have any interaction with his brother, so that way. And so an interesting thing, I was talking to John over at Cross yesterday about this, and he said the calves. When we look at that, what does that remind you of?
Time in the wilderness.
Time in the wilderness when Aaron made the golden calf. However, this one, the Jewish commentators say this is a little different, that they weren't actually making a image of God, but what God would be writing on. So I thought that was interesting. So that's the Jewish one of the Jewish commentators' perspectives was that they weren't the bull, but they were right. That's what God would write on. So
They weren't making a graven image.
they were not making a graven image of God. They were giving you a symbol of what God would write on. I don't know if I believe that, but that's what the commentary said from a Jewish rabbi. So just take that with a grain of salt. But he did that so that again he's doing it for who? He's doing it for himself. Again, he doesn't want his followers to become a part of this other with his brother's kingdom. And so he purposely does stuff for himself to stay in power.
They weren't brothers. Jeroboam was the son of Nebat,
Okay,
and Rehoboam was the son of Solomon.
gotcha.
So they had more reason to be rivals.
Right, but still, and still, but the thing is still they, it's all about their personal power, and I think that's the big key of that. And I also think that as a church, how do we look at our leadership and ask them, are they serving themselves or are they serving God? And that's something that we need to continuously ask within our churches, within our governance, to make sure that we're actually trying to do God's will. Not saying we're going to be perfect, because you know me, I am not. But how do you? But it's something that we need to keep reminding our the bigger denominations. You know, how are we serving God's people? How are we helping God's people? Are we doing what we need to do? That's not to say that we always yell at the national church or anything like that about what's going on, but it's always asking, and you can get it down to just even our church, are we doing what we need to do in the community? Are we being who we need to be for the church? And it's to ask leadership too. Is council doing what council is supposed to be doing for the church? Is the pastor doing what the pastor is supposed to be doing for the church? It's always that question that we need to be asking.
You're also looking at the splitting of Israel into two kingdoms.
Correct.
Right?
Correct.
So maybe God would like unity in the church and in his people.
Right.
Not it being torn apart.
Well, he picked the wrong denomination for that. Lutherans are, we'll separate at a drop of a hat. We're really good at that. The ELCA is an anomaly within the Lutheran Church because most Lutheran churches will divide because they don't like the color of the carpet. It should be blue, not red.
Or the roof is too steep or something.
Yeah. Or we don't like how the fellowship hall looks. You put the plant on the wrong side of the fellowship hall. We need to start a new church.
Or they have a central altar
Yeah.
setting. That's what happened at Ezekiel in River Falls.
Yeah.
Yeah, Ezekiel, from the time you belonged in high school, it split at least 3 times.
Yeah.
Yeah, 2 or 3 times, yeah. They-
3 other churches have
It was
come out of
remodeling,
Ezekiel.
And they
Yeah.
were having a central,
They're arguing about the altar,
Yeah.
people left.
or where the baptismal
And
font
started
would be,
a
or
new one.
something.
Yeah, they did.
Yeah.
Hope, faith,
Yeah.
and I said love is next, right?
Hope,
Hope. Well, those are the names of the churches,
Yeah.
faith, hope. I said, well,
Could
love
be the third
has to
one,
be
yeah.
the third. Probably.
But that's
one.
Yeah.
So in the history of this church,
Mhm.
you said Sunday, didn't you, that we're coming up on our 150th anniversary?
correct.
So it's not, this church hasn't always been called Gethsemane, has it?
No.
No.
Okay. So it must have split too during those 150 years. There must have been some splits.
Yeah, so that's why you got peace. Peace came out of here. So did Trinity. So did New Life in Christ.
Yep. And
We had Peace and
Robert's
Woodside,
section.
they're that
Robert
far apart,
Cross.
I don't know why.
Cross Lutheran did.
Yeah, but Woodside wasn't always where it is now.
Right.
No, it
But,
was
you know, I
moved.
remember growing up, going up to Grandpa and Grandma Hanson's church, you know, Woodside, but yet Peace Lutheran was right.
well, the Woodside, something about the cemetery, wasn't that? Well, for one thing, they didn't believe in what?
Woodside didn't believe in.
Well, I think then there was a big split with the one topic that we talked about, predestination.
I think that's what it was.
Yeah, predestination. I think that was a big split within the church early.
Yeah.
Was that
And
whether
then there
you
was something about the cemetery too, I think, that Woodside split them. They were separate.
so you can sort of see, yeah.
Why is it some churches have a big growth spurt right now? It seemed, I was talking to a lady, the one that's out on 128, just north of the truck stop there.
Mhm.
She was saying they actually have to build on very quickly.
Yeah.
We got too many people.
Yeah.
What are they doing that we're not? You know, it'd be great if we could get some of their extras.
This could be a lot of different reasons.
Are they a free Lutheran? Is that?
Exactly, yeah, exactly. Are they more of a Bible teaching church, or like a Baptist?
Is that Christ the King?
Calvary?
Oh,
That's
Calvary?
an Assembly of God.
That's Assembly of God
Assembly
Church.
of God, yeah.
Yeah.
That's,
Well,
Yeah,
that
but
would be
there's
quite
one
different
south
than
on-
Lutheran Church.
Yeah.
If it's Assembly of
But
God.
Christ the King is
Marvel.
free
Do you
Lutheran,
know
I
what
believe,
church,
you know.
what's the name of the church Janelle goes to? Do you know that? Do you know the name of Janelle's church? I know you've been there for the
No, I don't. know
Good
the
Friday
name
or
of
the
it.
Easter.
Know where it is, but I don't
Yeah.
know the name.
So yeah, I think that's the
720.
Sue
Yeah.
Pollitt you're talking about?
yeah
Yeah, she
that,
goes down there,
yeah.
Assembly of God.
Yeah, it's the Assembly of God. So it's just it's a different denomination, so a different way to look at God.
And I'm sure that she doesn't get anything out of the Lutheran Church. We're not doing anything right. I mean, it's all Assembly of God.
So it's a lot of it's just theology. You know, what do we believe and stuff.
Yeah, but we all still use the same Bible.
This is where
Look
you
at how many
get
different ones
Yeah.
there are.
Yeah, I know, but everything goes back to the King James pretty much, right?
That was
So,
an English thing.
King James is a whole book, whole can of worms when it comes to that. So the King James version was written so that people could memorize the Bible.
Sometimes they just leave because they don't like the pastor.
Correct. There's the other thing too. Yeah. The pastor.
That's true.
Yeah. That's not. Yeah. The
We
pastor.
had that here once.
Yeah. The pastor makes people mad, or there's a lot of different reasons people go to different churches. I mean, you know, there's theology. There's the way that I look at it is, do people in your pews want to invite their friends? If they don't want to invite their friends, then the church is doing something wrong. I mean, so a lot of these churches that are growing, they have people there that are passionate about, hey, I am seeing faith here as a thing that is exciting for me, a faith that means something to me. And so a lot of these churches that are growing right now have people saying that. And do we as Lutherans, are we doing the same thing? I think sometimes we get a little too caught up in our rituals sometimes as Lutherans. But I also know that for me, sometimes rituals is really important. You know, I was at a funeral where they didn't do a lot of the rituals that we were used to doing, and I was like, this doesn't really feel like a funeral to me. But for other people, our rituals are very hollow. They don't mean anything to them. And so the beauty of Christianity is the amount of different denominations. And I would argue that's a good thing, because then people can find how they see God, and it's expressed in different ways. Is our expression going on the way out? It might be. And that's okay if it is. I mean, because God is, the biggest thing out here is God. Not whether there's going to be a Lutheran church. Not whether there's going to be an Assemblies of God church. Not whether there's going to be a Baptist church. At the end of the day, the most important thing is God and Jesus. And there's different lenses that we use to look at God and Jesus. I like the Lutheran lens a lot. That's how I best relate to God. If there was no more Lutheran church, I would find a different church to go to. But I would still think of a lot of things that we do as Lutherans that are very strong for me. Like my funeral is going to have a lot of Lutheran pieces to it, because I find those things meaningful for me, and I would hope that I can pass it on to my kids and grandkids, that those things are meaningful to me. This is the reason why it's meaningful for me. This is why I want my service to be this particular way. But that's me. A lot of other people don't want that. They want something completely different. That's great. But this is the expression of Lutheranism is how I see God best. And I experience God the best. That's for me. That's not for everybody. I totally understand that, and I think that's great, because I want people to have a relationship. That's one of the reasons why people are like, say, why if I'm going to leave this church? I'm like, I want you. If anybody leaves Gethsemane, I always say, I want you to find a church that works best for you. I don't want you not to go to church. I want you to find a church that works best for you. That's been my stance the whole time. I've had people say, well, we'll just come to church here. They use it as a bargaining tool. I'm like, no, if you want to come here, great. But I'd rather have you go to a church where you feel comfortable, where you feel God's presence, where you feel the Holy Spirit moving towards you. And so some people don't find that approach very helpful, though. So,
Yeah,
Good information.
The most important thing is you're planting the seed,
Right.
you know, and then, because, yeah, a prime example, our kids during high school didn't wanna come here. They wanted to go with their friends to more evangelical, whatever. And then they went to college and they went back to the liturgy. They decided they really liked the liturgy
Yeah.
from the Lutheran church and ended up going back to,
Well, Episcopalian churches
like
are
not
Lutheran churches.
Episcopalian, but what's the other one? The American version of it. Anyway, they use the same liturgy. It wasn't
Right.
the Lutheran church necessarily, but they still use the liturgy. And the Catholic Church does too, obviously,
correct.
you know. I mean, I have a friend that, you know, was very, very Lutheran, but then her husband was Catholic and she finally decided.
What
"I might as well
about
just-"
like an evangelical free church?
Yeah.
What do they believe in?
Maybe one day I should just, maybe for one Bible study,
Yeah, it'd be a good
why don't I
Bible
just go
study.
through and run through all the different denominations and what they believe in?
My
Yeah.
youngest
That's a-
son, they go to that.
Yeah,
Well, her dad was a
I've got a
pastor.
nice little
Pastor.
pamphlet that explains that. I did a forum on
He
it.
did a
Yeah.
forum on it
Yeah.
once, yeah.
It explains what their theology is, and
Yeah. Why don't you bring that in once, when
Yeah.
we'll do that
you
on
can
a,
just copy it off, you know, and,
Yeah.
and everybody can have a copy.
and we could talk about it, because yeah, I think that's an interesting thing too, you know, what's the differences? Because we have a lot of, we're in common communion with a lot of different folks. Like the
They
Episcopalians,
simply break it
Presbyterians.
down liturgical churches and non-liturgical
Yep.
churches.
Yep.
And there's a striking difference between the two.
Yeah, and and this all has to do with the Reformation as well too. So, you know, the way that we worshipped changed. You know, it used to be you didn't sing hymns in church. Due to the Reformation, you started doing that. You know, there wasn't, you know, people got away from stained glass windows. They didn't like stained glass windows. They didn't like candles. Some churches are very much, you know, we want as low church as possible. There might be a cross, there might not be. Other churches are exact opposite. Smells and bells.
Some of them
Smells and bells.
look like,
Smells and incense. Incense and
oh,
Yes.
I can.
There was a church we saw in Ghent, Belgium, and it was Catholic. And then when the Protestant Reformation came along, the Calvinists came in there, and they tore all the idolatry and all the decor, I would call it, in the church, the stained glass windows. It all came down for however long the Calvinists controlled the church. And the Catholics came back in, and
put it all back
and some
in.
of it got restored, you know, but they have a lot of statuary in Catholic churches that, you know.
Yeah, the Lutheran
I-
church, they wanted to you know, with the Reformation, was concentrating on music and
Right.
the sermon,
Yes.
you know. So they were very austere, you know, like if you go to Europe or Scandinavia, the churches are very austere. You know, there's a pulpit, but the music was important, you know,
Yep.
so.
That's why we sing. So
When
But
I
anyway,
lived in Germany for a year, we went to the, in the little village of Eggenhausen. The only church was a Catholic church.
Mhm.
So we went to that quite a bit. It was, we didn't know if they were speaking German or Latin. But we did.
lot out of the sermon.
No, but we got the feeling. We got the feeling of the
Yeah.
community of the church and stuff, and they really have it rough. Their pews are like, and their kneeling benches are raw wood
Yeah.
that are very old, so they're splintering. You know, I mean, it was like you don't wear
So you want those here?
no.
They don't wear shorts.
No, they don't wear shorts and they don't wear nylons. So,
We went to a church in Seoul, Korea. It was a Catholic church, I'm pretty sure. Anyway, we had no idea what was going on, except when they sang the hymns.
Yeah.
They had some of the same tunes that we had heard, you know, that kind of brought us in, like, oh yeah, I kind of feel like now I belong here, you know.
So you were singing different words than they were.
Yeah.
Well, it was all in Korean. I had no idea what they were
When I
saying.
went to Hawaii, we went to a church that it was all in Hawaiian, but it was interesting. They had like 6 or 7 baptisms that day.
Wow.
So that was really kind of cool.
Cool. And so like I said, I think as you can tell from all the stories we have, Reformation is how do we come together? How do we stay together, especially with forces that can pull us apart really easily? And I think it gets back to, as you look at the text too, what does it mean to be a servant leader? I think that's when we have our leadership act as servant leaders. I think that's when then you have good leadership. I will have several bishops who disagree with me on that. But I think as a leader in the church, you need to be a servant leader. You need to take into consideration the people you are the pastor for, or the governance board for. You need to think of those people and how do we work for the greater good of God within their lives and within the community. And that's what this text is about, which is why this is very powerful for us on Reformation Sunday, to remind us, are we doing that for our folks here? Are we doing that as a national body for our folks within the ELCA? And if not, what do we need to do to change that? So,
I talked to one of the members that had been, Presbyterian church, and I said, well, I've known him for a long time. I said, it's nice to, have you here. And he said it feels good to be in church.
Mhm.
For him, it's, a place to come and worship, so we need to be very welcoming.
yep. And so, how do we stay welcoming?
Just like brother-in-law
Mhm.
who was baptized Catholic, has been going to the Catholic Church.
Mhm.
Then my sister grew up Presbyterian,
Mhm.
and now he has, since he's a Catholic,
Mhm.
she's going to the Catholic Church.
Okay. Yeah, I think it's how do we look at coming together around things, and how do we make sure we make the environment good for people to want to come? So I think a lot of times you ask why churches tend to grow. There's a lot of different reasons, but one sense they're welcoming. They're helping people find value in faith. They're having people feel welcome. They're having people feel God's message. Those would be some reasons I would say. So
Well, it was good that Jackie said we ran out of bulletins last Sunday.
yeah.
Oh, is that right?
Yep.
How many do we have that are coming from
sermon too?
Presbyterian?
Hmm?
I know at least 4.
Oh, it's good.
Yeah, there were six or seven here Sunday.
So for
Yeah.
the Presbyterians coming here, what would be the biggest change for them? Because we have more liturgy than they would in their service?
Our communion is in with and under, and
Communion
they
is
say
different.
Communion is
represent.
different?
Represents. So yeah, the way we do communion is different.
Because they don't come forward, they,
No, the language is different.
oh.
So
But they don't
Yeah.
have it as
Right.
much either, do they?
I don't think most people do it as much as we do.
Oh, okay.
So I think that's
No,
that's
they
a
don't.
Paul
They
thing.
We
Not
need
a,
it, we need it more than.
I need it. I don't know about you guys. I need it every week.
I miss
So-
communion at the altar.
That's
Mhm, I do
one.
too.
We've been. That's one thing that's hard
I do
to
too,
do.
but my knees are so sore now, I
Right.
can never kneel. I have to stand
You
up.
can
Yeah.
still go and stand, that's
I
what they do
guess.
at my sister's church, if they can't kneel, they just still go up and stand.
Well, I remember when we first did this, Elaine Paul was the only one that couldn't kneel and she'd stand up, and everybody else knelt, and I thought, oh, I could never do it.
I went to church last Sunday with my daughter-in-law. She changed churches from this nice little country church to a bigger one because it's closer. But they all sat at their communion rail all the way around.
They sat.
They sat on their knees. They knelt.
Kneel, yeah.
Said knelt.
They
No,
kneel.
yeah,
They
yeah.
kneel, yeah.
Yeah,
But they all knelt. Yeah.
she said sat.
So would you feel uncomfortable if you stood up there and everybody else was kneeling? I mean, would that make you feel standing out?
No.
There was one guy who stood up.
Mhm.
Right, I know, but I mean, maybe somebody wouldn't want to do that because they got to
They
stand
still
up.
have
and-
I
to do
didn't
a
go.
Well, you
couple
did it
steps
before where
unless they
those that
walk
wanted to
around.
come up went up and
Yeah.
then the other ones just went through the other
Right.
line.
Yeah.
Right.
Maybe once a month or something.
But they
Yeah,
brought me
that would be
communion.
nice.
I
Okay.
didn't go up.
That would be nice
That would be nice.
We can offer that.
But,
to go to the
you know,
rail.
people are in such a hurry, we gotta get this church
Yeah.
done by,
Well, we
Right?
you don't have time to contemplate when you're going through,
yeah.
wafering
I have to
wine
count
in the
on-
back you sit. You don't have
concentrate
time
on
for-
walking.
Yeah,
I'm not
in
tripping.
confirmation, I was
I don't have a
taught to
moment.
do
Mhm.
a time to
To
sit.
sit.
and
How long
you
is
pray.
for church?
How long is church? Depends how long the sermon is.
That's a very long Sunday.
Or announcements.
Or announcements, yeah.
I asked about the evangelical free church, is that they wanted my son Brian to be baptized over because it wasn't legal in their church to be baptized here. He didn't. Said, I'm baptized already.
Legal, huh?
Yeah.
Baptists would say that as well too.
Oh, really?
Illegal.
Huh?
It's not illegal.
They don't baptize babies, they just wait until they're old enough to make their own choice.
Correct, correct. That was one of the parts that me and Jeanette always disagreed on.
Yeah.
Oh, infant baptism?
Yeah, so the infant baptism, so the way that one of my mentor pastors described infant baptism to me was, think of it as a birthday gift. Think of baptism as a birthday gift. Now, if you're a little kid and you get a birthday gift, we as Lutherans say, you're happy for the gift. You might not be able to say thank you for the gift, but you're really happy about the gift. Well, the Baptists would say until you're able to say thank you for the gift, you can't really accept the gift. I'm like, well, the baby's still going to accept the gift even though they can't say thank you.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's the big difference is Baptists want you to be able to say thank you to God for that grace. And I get that at times. But at the same time, I don't think I have the ability to put dimensions around God's grace. I can't say God's grace only applies when I say thank you.
And we say thank you at our affirmation of baptism.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct. So it's just different ways to think of things. And so again, it's that lens. It's that lens that comes down that why we're Lutheran or why we're whatever denomination you want to be, or it's how you best experience God and interpret God. What's the best way? Whatever works best for you.
Right.
But rather than just doing things since you've been here, you always tell people why we're doing things. And that's very important that people understand why, because they may not know.
Right.
It might just be a
Context matters.
Context matters.
Yes, that's right.
Oh, God, he was listening to the sermon.
So yeah, it definitely and so that's why I always like to have like when we run through the service, this is the reason why we do the service. A lot of times, I know a lot of our Baptist brothers and sisters like to poke fun at the Lutherans and say we're not very biblical, and then I'll just simply point at them back and say, have you looked at our service yet?
The whole liturgy.
The whole liturgy is biblical. How do you say that?
Mm-hmm.
I'm like, obviously I don't say obviously you don't read your Bible, though I want to. I'll probably put that out of the podcast, but yeah, I think there's a misunderstanding about that. And again, I think it comes back to our lesson today. How do we have Christian unity? How do we bottle our own egos into that sometimes and allow God to work? And I think what we hear in today's lesson would have gone a lot better if both of those rulers would have listened to God and said, okay, this is what my ego says. This is what God says. To be a good ruler, to be a good leader, you need to listen to what God is telling you, not always about saving your own hide. So.
Speaking of Baptists, our Darren and Sarah went this last week for 3 days down to Missouri and Arkansas on a motorcycle trip. And he said you would not believe the amount of small little Baptist church that are all over the countryside. We just go around corners and there's Baptist church all over down there.
Absolutely.
Same in the south.
Yeah.
And we were traveling with a
town
motor and
there.
we'd stop in a church every Sunday. Well,
Yep.
this one church, we stopped and they had 12 people there.
Yep.
They were so happy we came. And we were late, but we were just in time for collection.
That's the best part of service.
That's what they thought.
Yeah.
You got
No
there
wonder
just
they were
in time.
happy.
But yeah, so this week when we do Reformation, I want you to sort of think about how, and this is a question I always hope we ask ourselves here at Gethsemane, is how are we doing what God wants us to do? What do we need to change? And it's not, it comes out of a sense of, are we doing God's mission? Are we doing God's work? And when we're not doing that, we need to change what we're doing. And so what does that look like? Are we doing enough for our community? Are we doing enough for our members? are we making faith a priority for people, or helping people see faith as a priority, I should say? So that's one thing I want you to think about. The Reformation process doesn't ever stop. It keeps going and going and going and going. Every day is a new day of Reformation. How do we make the church better? How do we start following God better? How do we listen to each other better? How do we treat each other, our brothers and sisters, better? How do we treat everybody with more respect and more dignity? Something that I think that we can all need right now. So, any other questions about the text?
I have one comment. I was wondering about the Israelites' yoke being so heavy. So I was checking back in chapter 9, 1 Kings. The descendants of the Amorites, Hittites, Perizzites, Hivites, and Jebusites who were left in the land, these Solomon drafted to be slaves. But the next verse 22, but of the people of Israel, Solomon made no slaves. And my footnote says the Israelite service was a levy or a form of taxation.
Which I think people would still say is slavery.
Still yoke.
It's still a yoke. It's still a yoke. But yeah, but I think it was very crude and rude how he put how I, because you guys complain, I'm going to be even tougher on you, and that's the world though right now, right?
Yeah.
Someone says, this isn't working well. Well, if you don't think it's working well now, just wait what I'll do next. As opposed to, how often do we hear nowadays, you're right, let's figure out something
A
different.
solution.
Let's figure out a solution.
And look what happens to whistleblowers.
Yeah.
I mean,
Oh, no
they
kidding.
become pariahs to society.
Yeah.
They're trying to do good.
Yeah. So it's hard to do. And you wonder why people act like that. Yeah, because they can get away with it. So why we need to reforming the church. So any other questions?
This isn't All Saints Sunday though yet, right?
That's the next Sunday. So All Saints Sunday is
'Cause
always
I
the
want to put my
Sunday.
aunt on there and I keep forgetting.
You can do it today.
I know,
It's
if I
out there.
remember.
It's out there.
So
We won't mention.
my question is then, what, in your opinion, is the next thing that the church needs to reform? How's that one? I mean,
Which
they
church?
have been.
Which church?
Our ELC. Because, it's just like, I'm sure you have an opinion. I'm sure there's
I
things
do.
out there that the overheads have been talking about, maybe even.
We don't have enough time. If you'd like to hear my thoughts, I'd be happy to give it to you, but it will take a little bit of time.
Well, what's at the top of the list?
What's at the top of the list?
Yeah.
Let me stop this and then I'll tell you.